When most people first step into the world of Bitcoin, they encounter something strangely anticlimactic. After all the hype about digital money, decentralization, and financial freedom, what they actually receive is a long, awkward string of letters and numbers. It doesn't look like money. It doesn't feel like a bank account. It looks more like a random password someone forgot to clean up before showing it to the public. And yet, this simple string is introduced with enormous gravity. This is your wallet address. This is where your Bitcoin lives. Protect it, share it, use it carefully. Naturally, the first reaction is confusion mixed with curiosity. How can something that looks so meaningless carry real value? And more importantly, where does it even come from? The misunderstanding usually begins with a familiar mental model. People assume a Bitcoin wallet works like a traditional bank account. You sign up somewhere, receive an address, and the system stores your balance on a server. But Bitcoin quietly breaks that expectation from the very beginning. There is no central database issuing addresses, no bank assigning account numbers, and no authority verifying your identity before you receive one. The address is not granted to you by a company or a government. It emerges from mathematics itself. And that small shift in perspective changes everything. Another surprising realization follows quickly after. Bitcoin is not actually stored inside your wallet. That sentence alone sounds strange, even contradictory. If the coins are not in the wallet, then where are they? The better way to think about it is that Bitcoin exists on a global public ledger, and your wallet is simply a tool that allows you to prove ownership and authorize transactions. The address you share publicly is not a container of value, but rather a visible identity derived from deeper cryptographic layers. It is closer to a public name tag than a digital vault. Understanding this distinction is the first step toward unraveling the mystery behind how an address is generated. To truly grasp the process, it helps to step away from technology for a moment and think about the idea of locks and keys. Imagine a system where you can create a lock that anyone can see and use to send you something securely, but only you possess the key capable of opening it. You can hand out the lock freely to the world without fear because knowing the lock does not reveal the key. Bitcoin uses a similar concept known as public key cryptography. There are two essential components: one piece of information meant to be shared openly, and another that must remain secret at all costs. The wallet address is connected to the public side of this relationship, but it is not the starting point. It is the final layer, the outward face of a process that begins much deeper beneath the surface. At this stage, many newcomers assume that addresses are generated through complicated registration systems or elaborate identity checks. The truth is almost absurdly simple. A Bitcoin address ultimately originates from randomness, not from a person's name, not from a server's database, and not from a centralized authority. Instead, it begins with a randomly generated number so vast that it stretches far beyond anything the human mind can comfortably imagine. This number becomes the seed from which an entire cryptographic identity grows. The address you see is only the last visible step in a long transformation, a mathematical journey that converts pure randomness into something structured, shareable, and functional. What makes this process remarkable is not only its technical elegance, but also its philosophical implications. For the first time in modern financial history, a person can generate a form of ownership without asking permission from anyone. No paperwork, no approval process, no external validation. Just mathematics operating according to deterministic rules. The address that appears on your screen is not proof that a company recognizes you. It is proof that you have participated in a specific sequence of cryptographic transformations. That subtle shift represents a radical departure from traditional systems of authority and trust. Still, we have only scratched the surface. The wallet address may be the most visible part of the process, but it is not the beginning. Behind it lies a hidden structure that determines everything about security and control. If the address is the public face, then something else must exist behind the scenes, something secret, powerful, and absolutely essential. And this is where the story truly begins. Before any address can exist, before any public identity can be shared, a single piece of information must come into existence. A number so important that whoever controls it ultimately controls the Bitcoin associated with that address. In the next part, we will step beyond the surface layer and explore the true origin of every Bitcoin identity, the private key, the invisible seed from which the entire system grows. If the Bitcoin address is the visible mask presented to the world, then the private key is the silent force behind it, unseen, uncelebrated, and yet infinitely more important. Every Bitcoin identity begins not with a username or an account request, but with the creation of a single number. At first glance, that sounds almost disappointingly simple. A number does not feel powerful. It does not carry the emotional weight of a contract or the authority of an institution. But in the world of cryptography, the right number can represent ownership, identity, and control over real economic value. That number is known as the private key, and everything that follows grows from it. The defining characteristic of a private key is randomness. Not casual randomness like flipping a coin or rolling a die, but cryptographic randomness generated with extreme care. The number must be unpredictable because predictability is the enemy of security. If someone else can guess or reconstruct the same number, then the illusion of ownership collapses instantly. Modern Bitcoin wallets rely on sophisticated sources of entropy, drawing from unpredictable data such as system timing, hardware noise, or dedicated random number generators. These inputs are transformed into a massive number that exists somewhere within an unimaginably large mathematical space. The scale is so enormous that even if every computer on Earth generated keys continuously for billions of years, the probability of two people producing the same one would remain effectively zero. Once this number exists, something remarkable happens. Without connecting to any server or registering with any authority, the holder of the private key has already created a new cryptographic identity. No one else knows it exists. No global registry tracks its birth. It is simply a piece of information that now carries potential power. This moment is the true beginning of a Bitcoin wallet, though it often happens invisibly behind the scenes when a wallet application is first created. The user may only see a friendly interface or a recovery phrase, but beneath that simplicity lies the raw private key, the foundation upon which everything else rests. From this hidden seed, the next transformation occurs. Using a mathematical process called elliptic curve multiplication, the private key is converted into another piece of information known as the public key. The details of elliptic curves can sound intimidating, but the core idea is surprisingly intuitive. It is easy to perform the transformation in one direction, turning the private key into a public key. But attempting to reverse the process is so computationally difficult that it becomes practically impossible. This one-way property is essential. It allows the public key to be shared openly without exposing the secret number that created it. This asymmetry forms the backbone of Bitcoin's security model. Anyone can know the public key. Anyone can interact with it. Transactions can be verified against it. Yet only the holder of the private key can produce the cryptographic signature required to move funds. In traditional finance, authority comes from institutions that confirm identity and authorize transfers. In Bitcoin, authority emerges from mathematical proof. If you possess the private key, you possess the ability to sign transactions. If you lose it, no customer service department can restore access. The network does not recognize excuses or personal stories. It recognizes only valid signatures derived from the correct key. There is also a philosophical weight hidden in this design. Ownership becomes deeply personal and intensely fragile at the same time. Control is absolute, but so is responsibility. The private key is not merely a password, it is a form of sovereignty encoded in numbers. This shifts the burden from institutions to individuals. Some find that empowering, a liberation from centralized oversight. Others find it daunting because mistakes carry permanent consequences. The simplicity of the concept, just a number, contrasts sharply with the magnitude of what that number represents. Interestingly, even at this stage, we still do not have what most people recognize as a Bitcoin address. The public key exists now, derived mathematically from the private key, but it is still not the familiar string used for receiving funds. That transformation requires additional layers designed to improve security, usability, and compatibility. The public key must be processed, compressed, and converted into a form that humans can handle more easily without sacrificing cryptographic strength. This moment marks a turning point in the story. the private key, has given birth to the public key, and the hidden foundation of a Bitcoin identity is now complete. The secret half remains protected. The public half is ready to be transformed, and the system prepares to generate the outward-facing address that people will actually see and use. In the next part, we will follow that journey step by step, watching as raw cryptographic data passes through a series of mathematical transformations, ultimately emerging as the familiar Bitcoin wallet address, a compact, human-friendly representation of a much deeper and more intricate structure. By the time a public key exists, something powerful has already taken shape behind the scenes. A secret number has been transformed into a public mathematical identity that can be shared with the world without revealing the original source. And yet, even now, we are still not looking at what most people recognize as a Bitcoin address. The public key, in its raw form, is long, complex, and not particularly friendly to humans. It contains far more information than necessary for everyday use. More importantly, exposing the raw public key too early could introduce subtle security considerations. What Bitcoin needs at this stage is a way to compress complexity into something compact, readable, and safer to distribute. That transformation happens through a sequence of cryptographic hashing processes that reshape the public key into its final outward appearance. Hashing is often described as creating a digital fingerprint. You feed data into a mathematical function, and the function produces a fixed-length output that uniquely represents the original input. Even a tiny change in the original data results in a completely different fingerprint. The process is deterministic, meaning the same input always produces the same output, but it is also one way. Knowing the fingerprint does not allow you to reconstruct the original data. In the context of Bitcoin, hashing serves multiple purposes at once. It shortens the public key into a more manageable size, adds an extra layer of security by concealing structural details, and prepares the data for encoding into a form suitable for everyday use. The journey from public key to address begins by passing the public key through a series of hashing algorithms. Each layer reshapes the information further, stripping away unnecessary bulk while preserving the uniqueness of the underlying identity. These transformations might sound purely technical, but they carry philosophical significance as well. Each step creates distance between the secret core and the public surface, like layers of armor protecting something fragile beneath. The resulting hash becomes a condensed representation of the public key, still tied cryptographically to the private key, but no longer revealing raw structural information. At this point, the system introduces additional elements designed to prevent human error. A checksum is added, functioning like a built-in verification code. If someone mistypes a character while copying an address, the checksum helps detect the mistake before funds are sent into the void. This small detail reflects one of Bitcoin's quieter design philosophies. The network itself does not forgive errors, so preventive mechanisms must be embedded directly into the structure of the address. The goal is not only cryptographic strength, but also practical usability in a world where humans inevitably make mistakes. Next comes encoding, the process that converts the hashed data into a format that people can read and share. Instead of raw binary numbers, the information is transformed into a string of characters designed to reduce confusion. Certain ambiguous characters are deliberately avoided so that an address remains distinguishable even when read quickly or written down by hand. The result is the familiar string that begins to look like a true Bitcoin address: compact, structured, and surprisingly elegant, considering the complexity hidden beneath its surface. What is fascinating about this final form is how much it conceals. To an everyday user, the address appears as nothing more than a destination, a place to send funds. But within that string lies the entire journey that began with a single random number. The private key gave birth to the public key. The public key passed through layers of hashing, and the hashed output was encoded into a human-friendly format. Each stage transformed the data further away from its origin, while preserving a deep cryptographic connection that the network can verify instantly. This layered transformation also explains why a Bitcoin address feels both simple and mysterious at the same time. It is simple because it can be copied, shared, and used without understanding the mathematics behind it. Yet it is mysterious because that simplicity is only the final mask placed over an intricate system of cryptographic relationships. When someone sends Bitcoin to an address, they are not interacting with a storage container, but with a mathematical identity derived through deterministic processes. The address is the public face of a hidden structure that continues to protect its secret core. By now, the full chain of creation has come into view. A random number became a private key. The private key generated a public key. The public key underwent hashing and encoding to produce a Bitcoin address. The entire process occurred without centralized approval or external oversight, relying only on mathematical rules that anyone can follow, but no one can cheat. And yet, even after understanding this technical journey, an important question remains. What does it all mean in practice? Why does this design allow people to create unlimited addresses? Why are certain myths about wallet security so persistent? And how does this process reshape our understanding of ownership itself? In the final part, we will step back from the mechanics and explore the broader implications, the misconceptions, the real-world consequences, and the deeper philosophy hidden inside something that at first looked like nothing more than a random string of characters on a screen. After tracing the journey from a single random number to a fully formed Bitcoin address, something subtle begins to shift in how we understand the entire system. What once looked like a meaningless string of characters now reveals itself as the visible endpoint of an elegant mathematical process. Yet the mechanics alone do not capture the full significance. The real impact appears when we step back and consider what this design makes possible in the real world. A person can generate not just one address, but thousands, millions even, without asking permission from any authority. There is no registration form, no identity verification, and no centralized record announcing that a new financial identity has been created. Each address emerges quietly from mathematics, independent and sovereign from the moment it exists. This ability introduces an entirely new dimension of privacy and control. Traditional financial systems rely on static accounts that remain tied to personal identity, making transactions easy to trace through institutional records. Bitcoin, by contrast, allows users to create fresh addresses whenever they choose, separating transactions into distinct streams of activity. Privacy is not automatic, but the tools exist by design. The address generation process itself is neutral and limitless, enabling a flexible approach to identity that would be impossible within the rigid structure of conventional banking. The system does not ask who you are. It only verifies whether a transaction carries a valid cryptographic signature. Despite this elegance, many misunderstandings persist. One of the most common is the belief that Bitcoin is stored inside a wallet address. The reality is more nuanced. Bitcoin exists as entries on a shared public ledger, and the address merely represents a destination associated with certain cryptographic conditions. Another frequent misconception is that losing a phone automatically means losing funds forever. In truth, the phone is only a tool for managing keys. As long as the private key or recovery phrase exists somewhere secure, access can be restored on a new device. The danger lies not in losing hardware, but in losing the underlying secret that proves ownership. Another myth that surfaces regularly is the fear that someone might randomly guess a private key and steal funds. While the concept sounds alarming, the scale of the key space makes such an event so improbable that it borders on the physically impossible. The number of potential keys is unimaginably vast, far exceeding the number of atoms in the observable universe. Brute force attacks do not fail because they are forbidden. They fail because mathematics makes them infeasible. This immense scale is not merely a technical detail, but a cornerstone of the entire system's security. Yet perhaps the most profound shift introduced by Bitcoin addresses is philosophical rather than technical. In traditional systems, ownership is defined by institutions that maintain records and enforce rules. In Bitcoin, ownership becomes a direct relationship between an individual and a piece of information. Whoever holds the private key holds the power to authorize transactions. There is no appeals process, no centralized authority capable of reversing decisions, and no intermediary capable of overriding cryptographic proof. This design grants extraordinary freedom, but it also demands a new level of responsibility. Security is no longer outsourced, it becomes a personal discipline. This duality creates both empowerment and tension. Some people embrace the autonomy, finding comfort in a system where control rests entirely in their own hands. Others feel uneasy, aware that mistakes cannot be undone by calling a support line. The address generation process reflects this broader philosophy. It gives individuals the ability to create their own financial identities at will, but it also removes the safety nets that centralized systems provide. The mathematics does not judge or intervene. It simply enforces the rules with absolute consistency. Returning to the original question, we can now see why a simple string of characters carries such weight. A Bitcoin address is not valuable because it contains coins, nor because a company issued it, but because it represents the final layer of a cryptographic structure anchored in mathematical certainty. Behind it lies a chain of transformations beginning with randomness, progressing through one-way functions, and culminating in a form that humans can use without needing to understand the complexity beneath. The address is a symbol of trust, placed not in institutions, but in transparent algorithms and shared consensus. And perhaps that is the quiet revolution hidden within the process. The generation of a Bitcoin wallet address is not merely a technical procedure. It is a redefinition of how identity and ownership can exist in a digital world. From a single random number emerges a public presence capable of receiving value from anyone on the planet without permission, without borders, and without reliance on traditional gatekeepers. What first appeared to be a random string now reveals itself as a doorway into a new model of finance, one where mathematics replaces bureaucracy and personal responsibility replaces institutional assurance. Understanding how an address is generated is ultimately about more than technology. It is about recognizing the deeper transformation occurring beneath the surface of modern money, where numbers become identities and code becomes a new language of trust.